Sharon last week. We truly appreciate the support. Thank you for coming out. And just to let you know that we are still accepting donations for the Canes project. So if it is that you did not get an opportunity to come to the play, but you still feel moved to make a donation, remember that the proceeds, well, let me not only say remember, because some persons, it might be your first time being introduced to what the proceeds from the play were going towards, but the proceeds from the play are going towards buying canes for students at the Salvation Army School for the blind. So if it is that you did not get to come to the play, we are still accepting donations. You can ask any of us how it is that you can make your contribution to help to buy a cane for a child. At this time, I am going to be turning over to PE, our senior, for him to do the official welcome and roll call of clubs.
Good evening again, everyone. On behalf of President Zuri and the members of our club, I would like to officially welcome you again to another meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Kingston. As always, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. This evening in particular, we do have a very informative session lined up. I hope you all enjoy. So let's get right into the roll call. Do we have any visitors with us from outside Jamaica?
Yes, good afternoon. Greetings from Toronto, Kiwanis Club of Toronto, Caribbean. Thanks for the invite and hopefully open for a great meeting. Blessings to all.
Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I do happen to be in Jamaica today, just arrived, but I'm here because the Jamaica Patriots Antigua group advertised the talk. So I actually live in Antigua.
Welcome. Glad to have you on the call and in Jamaica with us tonight.
Hi, I'm listening in from New York, joining from New York. A friend sent me the link, and I'm happy to be with the group tonight.
Happy to have you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Frederick.
What time should it ring?
I'm also in Antigua, and I got the link from a friend.
Thanks for joining.
Good evening, joining from Barbados.
Good evening.
Good evening, I'm from Montreal.
Good evening, Robert Frederick, joining from St. Lucia.
Good evening, I'm June Macmillan from Port of Spain, Trinidad, invited by a friend.
You're welcome. Do we have anyone else from outside Jamaica with us tonight?
Yes, I'm here from Antigua, and I was invited by a friend.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Come, say something.
Just a second. Asim, someone has a mic open, and I can't identify which one, and maybe just asking everybody to keep your mic closed unless you're about to speak. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hillary Hickling. I'm calling from Kingston, and Rupert Lewis.
Hi, good evening. Tommy Descott from Barbados, joining in on this discussion this evening.
Thanks for joining. If there's welcome, Carl. Happy to have you. And Rosalind.
It's not that easy.
Okay, if there is no one else from outside Jamaica, do we have any visitors or guests from Division 25?
Never mind.
Good evening. I am Secretary Andrea from KC Estuary, and I'm happy to be in the meeting. I got the link from another group, but I was very interested to hear what the discussion will be tonight, so I joined. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Good evening. Yeah, this is DP Denzel from the Kiwanis Club of Outermany, Western Jamaica. Thank you so much for the invite. We anticipate a great evening with you. Very interesting topic. Along with me, there are about 7 other members from the Kiwanis Club of Outermany, and we have about 3 guests.
Yeah, man, thank you and your delegation for joining.
Good evening. This is DLG Lorraine from Division 25 Online Jamaica. I am the secretary at this moment. There are 2 of us. Newton Wright, my husband, and a perspective, I forgot, is here with me also. So there are 3 of us, and 2 and 1. And we are looking forward to tonight's topic, and I will be taking notes and reporting back. Thank you very much for the invite.
No problem. Welcome to you. Do we have anyone else from Division 25?
Good evening, distinguished Kiwanians, distinguished guests, Kiwanians and guests. This is PD Crystal Heaven from the Kiwanis Club of Montego Bay. We're in 2 numbers so far. Looking forward to a great meeting. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for joining.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. This
Good
is
evening.
Coita Sterling from the Estuary, and 3 of us are on. Looking forward to a very good meeting.
Thanks for joining. If there's no one else from 25, how about Division 24? Anyone from Division 24 on the call this night? Okay, how about Division 23 West? Do we have anyone from 23 West? How about 23 East?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm past director Annette from the Kiwanis Club of Greater Portmore. I don't know if any other member is online, but I hope to enjoy your meeting.
Hope you enjoy. Thanks for joining.
You're welcome.
Do we have anyone else on from 23 East? Okay,
Hi,
if
good
not,
evening to our senior. This is Governor-elect Sharon representing the Kiwanis of New Kingston. I think I see 2 other members on. Really our pleasure being on with you this evening, and we look forward to the discussion. Thanks so much for having us.
yeah, man, thank you for joining. If there's no one else from 23 East, how about 23 Central? No visitors from 23 Central? Do we have any SLPs on call tonight? How about guests of Kiwanians? Okay, that seems like everyone. Well, once again, thank you all for joining, and we do hope that you enjoy this evening. Over to you, President Zuri.
Thank you, PE. Welcome, everyone. I'm particularly delighted to have so many of our friends from the other Caribbean territories visiting with us this evening. I do hope that you have quite the experience with us that will lead you to want to come back and visit us on Tuesday evenings for our meetings. At this time, we're going to be doing apologies for absence, and I have three. I have apologies from our secretary, DLG Willie Reason, very familiar face at our meetings. So he is not with us this evening due to other commitments. Also, Vice President Uncle Andrew Burton tendered his apologies for absence this evening, as well as Director Andy Jean-Baptiste. Due to work commitments, they are unable to join with us this evening. I am going to ask the other members of the Kiwanis Club of Kingston if they did receive any apologies, whether for absence or for lateness. All right, it seems that there are no other apologies, so now I'm going to go to recognition of birthdays and anniversaries, and I'm going to ask DP Newton if he could assist us in this regard this evening with our birthday announcements.
Gladly, President Zuri. Good evening again, everyone. You know, we have a tradition at the Kiwanis Club of Kingston where at each of our meetings, we recognize members and others friends who have joined with us who are having a special occasion anytime within that week. So from our listing for this week, we have DP. And for those who don't know what DP is Distinguished President Derek Clark, who celebrates his birthday on the 21st, which is tomorrow. On the 22nd, we have Naslin, and Naslin is the wife of DP Dennis Townsend. She celebrates her birthday on the 22nd. And also on the 26th of this month, we have DP Lass Dixon and Sandra celebrating their wedding anniversary. No, that's it for our official listing, but we, as usual, we are gonna ask and invite anyone online this evening who is having a special occasion, birthday, anniversary, just an achievement. We are gonna ask that you just open your microphone, share with us so we can celebrate with you. Anyone? I see we have 91 persons online this evening. Nobody having any special occasion? Well, I guess all of us, our special occasion is being here this evening. So again, as you were welcomed by our president-elect a while ago, let me say welcome again. Those who are having any special occasion, please enjoy. And it's back to you, President Zuri.
Thank you. And before we go to Kiwanis education, I want to extend a special welcome to our presenter for this evening, Professor Anthony Bogues. Welcome, sir. Thank you for accepting the invitation to come and share with us this evening. We look forward to your presentation. We have our notebooks ready, we have our pens ready, because we are going to absorb as much as we can this evening. And if it is that you have any guests with you this evening, we also extend a very special Kiwanis Club of Kingston welcome to them as well. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, President Johnson.
You're most welcome.
For that warm welcome.
You're most welcome, sir. It's our pleasure. Now, I'm going to call on DLG Desmond to do Kiwanis education for this week.
Thank you, President Zuri. Good evening, fellow Kiwanians, SLP members and guests. The topic is really on K-Kids and Builders Club. Well, come February 9 to February 13, we have K-Kids Week. So we're celebrating K-Kids Week. And Builders Club Week is February 23 to 27. And I'll encourage all sponsoring clubs and their members to support and celebrate with our SLP members. I'll just mention the objects, or the objectives really, and activities of K-Kids. Objectives of K-Kids shall be to provide opportunities for working together in service to school and community, to develop leadership potential, to foster development of a strong moral character, and to encourage loyalty to school, community, and nation. And it's the same for the Builders Club. So the objectives and activities of K-Kids, we have it as the same for Builders Club. The motto for K-Kids is we build. And the motto for Builders Club is building leaders. Just really to let you be aware that K-Kids Week and Builders Week coming up shortly. So we put that on our agenda and work with our children during those times. Thank you very much, President. Over to you.
Thank you, DLG. And I hope that you all have taken note of that Builders Club Week, Kids Week coming up in February. So put that down in your calendars and take some time out to share with our students during that time. And I encourage you, as usual, to try to learn something new about the movement that you are a part of, whether weekly or daily. And with that said, we are now at this evening's main event when we will hear from our guest presenter. But to give us a little bit more so that we find out a little bit more about who he is, I'm going to be inviting DP Stewart to do the introduction of this evening's guest presenter.
Thank you, President Zuri. Just confirming you're hearing me okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Fellow Kiwanians and guests, special welcome to especially those of you who are overseas. I guess the whole idea of Caribbean sovereignty or sovereignty in the Caribbean, is something that you would be interested in. I'm very happy that you have decided to join us this evening. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about our presenter. And I'm sure some of you know him, I'm pretty sure. Professor Anthony Bogues is a writer, a scholar, a curator, and the author, editor of 11 books and over 100 articles in the fields of African and African diasporic political thought and theory, African and African diasporic intellectual history, and the Caribbean art. He's currently working on a manuscript titled Black Critique and co-editing some of the unpublished writings of Sylvia Wynter. He's writing a series of biographies, one on the Haitian artist André Pierre, and another on the life and times of Michael Manley, as well as on C.L.R. James. He's also completing an intellectual biography of the Caribbean theorist Sylvia Wynter, as well as working with the Haitian artist Edouard Duval-Carré and the curator Kennedy Jones on an art historical book on the Haitian Revolution. He is the Asa Mesa Professor of Humanities and African Studies, a professor in the Department of History of Art and Architecture at Brown University. As well, somebody's mic is open, please close your mics. Sorry about that interruption. Let me pick up back where I was. In the Department of History of Art and Architecture at Brown University, as well as a distinguished visiting professor and curator at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. He's also professor at large at the Africa Institute in Sharjah. He has been a visiting professor of the London School of Economics and Political Science, as well as the Free University of Amsterdam. He's the convener of the UNESCO project, Mapping Global Anti-Black Racism, and was most recently the curator of the art documentary, Black Life in the Time of the Now, which premiered in December 2023 at Art Basel in Miami. He is the producer of 2 other film documentaries and the inaugural director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice at Brown University, where he has received numerous awards for his scholarship and research. Anthony has curated or co-curated art shows in the Caribbean, South Africa, and the US. He was recently awarded the Honorary Doctor of Literature from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, for his substantial contribution of the fields of African and African diaspora political thought, intellectual history, and Caribbean art. He received his PhD in 1994 in political theory from the University of the West Indies, Jamaica. Bogues is an associate editor of the Caribbean Journal, BIM, and sits on the board of the Center for the Arts, Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and a member of the editorial collective Boundary 2. He is the co-convener and co-curator of the Global Curatorial Project, a curatorial and exhibition project on the global history of racial slavery and colonialism with the National African American Museum of History and Culture at the Smithsonian. The exhibition opened in December 2024 in Washington, D.C. And I just want to mention something else, which is not part of his resume, that if it wasn't for this person, I would not have known about Professor Bogues to be able to invite him. So I want to give a special thank you to Professor Rupert Lewis, who was my main contact, and I think he's on as well. So fellow Kiwanians and guests, please join me in welcoming Professor Anthony Bogues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, for that introduction, or for Stewart. Oh, Stewart is the DP Stewart. Let me call you that. That's how I see the name online. And I want to say good evening to everybody, as well as another special thank you to the President Zuri, for this invitation to share some remarks about Caribbean sovereignty today. I share these remarks within the context of a new configuration of geopolitics, what Stuart Hall, the Caribbean thinker, would call a new conjuncture, a new moment when the old contours of the society that we understood and we inhabited has shifted or is shifting underneath us, because something new is happening.
Sorry, Professor, getting some feedback that we're not hearing you as loudly. Don't know if it's the mic, if you're not speaking closer to the mic.
All right, can you hear me? Can you hear me better?
Yes, much better. Thank you very much.
Okay. My apologies about that. So my remarks, as I said, are going to be within the context of a new situation, a new configuration, a new geopolitics, new moment of geopolitics within the globe. In this particular new situation, we in the Caribbean need to grapple with what is happening and to come to some decisions about what is possible and what it is that we can do. We cannot afford to be reactive, but we need to begin to act where possible to chart a different course, a course which foregrounds our own interests. Because one of the things that sovereignty is about is our own capacity to act, to chart our own future wherever that is possible. So what I want to do tonight before I come to this charting is to talk a little bit about the new situation that we find ourselves in. I'm trained, obviously, as a political theorist at the University of the West Indies, where Professor Rupert Lewis and the late Professor Rex Snackleford were my members of my committees. But one of the things I learned at the University of the West Indies when I attended in the 1990s in the PhD program was that you can't think about questions of theory as a political theorist without not understanding history. And one of the things I always say to my graduate students is that there is no theory without history. And indeed, not only is that there no theory without history, but there's no understanding of the present.
My apologies, Professor. My apologies.
Again, you have problems again?
I'm still getting some feedback that I think what is happening is that where you have the mic and when you turn to look at what you have written, if you could move the mic more in line with where you are.
I can't move my mic. I have to move the computer.
Okay, well that would, yeah, so that they're kind of aligned. Because I think that is what.
Just tell me if that is better, and I'll speak directly. Is that better?
No. Still low.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a thing because I'm not at home. I'm actually I'm in a hotel room to do this. I'm doing this.
Okay, well, as long as you can keep it close to the mic, that will help. That's where the issue.
Is this much better?
Yes, that is much better.
You will not see my face. What you will see is more, is the top of my head.
I can see your face too.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about how we got to where we are at this moment. And I want to begin with obviously thinking about the world in the 20th century. And thinking about that world in the 20th century is to begin to think about post-1945. That is after the Second World War, the ending of the Second World War. The ending of the Second World War was a moment of what some commentators have called a moment of decolonization. It is a moment in which the United Nations was also formed, but it was also a moment in which this question of sovereignty appeared very importantly in world politics. And sovereignty was linked to this moment of decolonization through the decolonization of hundreds of countries that were previous colonies of Britain, France, Spain, and other European countries. What I think is important is that to understand sovereignty is also to understand that before the 1945, in about 1930s, right when before the war started, that 24% of the world, of the earth, was colonized by one particular country, and that was Great Britain. It is also to understand that colonialism was really about certain things, and that these things we could call extraction, the ownership of resources, and direct rule. What post 1945 developments and decolonization did was to end the European colonial empires. But it also did certain things after the war. After the war, there was the idea in many European countries that what you now had to do was to set up a set of rules-based international system. Conventions which were being spoken about from the 1880s now became the ground from which people were beginning to think about how war should be conducted and how relationships should be conducted between powers. What then became consolidated in the 1940s in what is known as the Geneva Conventions. Then there was also, obviously, at the level of economics and economy, the idea of what was called Keynesian economic system. The idea that the market had to be constrained in some way, that the government and the state had some role in economic life, and that one of the most important things that happened was the creation of what was called welfare states. Then you had obviously the rule of law as something that was important, and that's how international relations should be conducted. And all of that then was under the rubric of something called a liberal democratic political system. So that the post-1945 was not just about decolonization, but was also about the setting up of a certain kind of international system run under what we call a liberal democratic set of systems run through rules of law. But there was also one other thing that is important to think about, and that was by the time you get to the 1950s, you get to the Cold War. And in that Cold War, which lasted right up until the early 90s, what you had was late 1980s and early 90s, was that what you had was the polarization of the world into two huge powers, the Soviet Union and the United States. But I would also want to suggest to you, audience, that liberal political orders that was being set up, that it had an underbelly, and that even the rules that were established did not apply to what was called the third world, to what we now call the global south. Because social orders, I would suggest to you, are complex configurations, and that one side on this complexity of this rule of law was, and liberal political order, were a practice of interventions, particularly in the Americas. These practices we can see very clearly as practices which undermine sovereign power and which indeed undermine the rule of law. And so let me talk a little bit about some of these practices, particularly the practices in this hemisphere. In 1776, we know there's the American Revolution. But by 1811, the United States begins its continental expansion from its original 13 states under a phrase of Thomas Jefferson called the Empire of Liberty. Between 1811 and 1897, the continental United States doubled its size. And in doubling its size, it did so under two particular ideological rubrics. One ideological rubric is something that we hear a lot about these days, which is the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. And that doctrine essentially asserted United States leadership in the Western Hemisphere and made it clear that United States was now the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. It is said in many quarters that the Monroe Doctrine was really to keep Europe out and was a doctrine against colonialism. I would want to argue that yes, part of it was about keeping Europe out, but really the key thing in the doctrine was about an assertion of United States leadership in the West, in the Americas. We hear a lot about the Monroe Doctrine, but we hear less about another doctrine that happened a couple of years after, and that was the doctrine of manifest destiny. And that doctrine was really important because what that doctrine said was that America is an exceptional country. The idea of exceptionalism in America began from the days of the Puritans in the New England area, when they began to talk about United States, they began to talk about the East Coast, Massachusetts downwards, as a city on the hill. By the time you get to the Manifest Destiny of 1845, what one now understands is that that city on the hill has now turned into a destiny, a provincial, a destiny for white settlers, where they are destined to settle in the continent, in a continent that the doctrine says was allocated to them by providence, that is allocated by God. So that therefore you begin to understand that in the late 19th century, there are two doctrines that are important for continental expansion inside the United States, as it takes Texas, Florida, and California, but it also has a set of doctrines that are important for the external intervention in United States. And so that by these two doctrines, I would argue, consolidate United States' hegemony in the Western world. One more thing historically that I think we need to understand, and that is a Naturalization Act of 1790. The first Naturalization Act of the United States, which happens after the Revolution, 1776 Revolution happens, as I said, 1790, and is a Naturalization Act in which it, and here I quote it restricts citizenships to, and continue the quote, to free white persons, and continue the quote, of good character. So that I want to mention that because I think that what is happening now is very much something new, but that what it is something that is what is happening now is rooted in a deep history of United States. I mention this because I also want to suggest to you that historical moments become grounds from which the present builds itself. And that because human actions is what create history. What creates or human actions or create what I like to call historical practices. Then these practices create grounds for society. And unless we break those practices, and unless we confront them, then these practices will come back to haunt us in new ways. But let us return to the post-World War II. As I said, the post-World War II is liberal international order, rules-based order. Sovereignty is recognized, but not necessarily practiced in many places, particularly in the relationship to United States and countries in its orbit, in what some people have called the American lake. All this, I would want to argue, shifts a bit in the 1980, and when we have an election of Ronald Reagan, Mrs. Thatcher, and Kohl, Helmut Kohl in what was then West Germany. And at that moment in the 1980, between 1980 and 1982, what we then see is a shifting from the liberal. We begin to see a shift in the liberal order, but also very importantly, we begin to see the appearance of what some people have called globalization and what others have called neoliberalism. At the heart of this neoliberalism project or globalization are some of the following things. A certain kind of market absolutism, what some people have called market fundamentalism, and an understanding of trade, of world trade, and an understanding of a global order in which a movement of capital is actually paramount. What is also, I think, important to understand at that moment is the emergence of technology firstly in the computers, and then is rapid development in what some people have called the fourth industrial revolution, in which things like AI become dominant. Globalization continues, I think, with and creates a world in which manufacturing over time, quite frankly, is reduced. It moves by the time you get to the late 1990s, manufacturing industries right across the world is down by 45%. But the key to understanding the conjuncture that we are going to be in, or we are now in, is really the 2008 crisis. A crisis in which people argue there was a major recession. And in that particular moment, I would argue that you begin to get the collapse of the liberal order, or the changes within the liberal order, and the rise of what some of us now call illiberalism, but certainly the rise of authoritarian regimes. And it is this rise, the moment we are in, is the emergence of liberalism to replace the globalization, and in the emergence of authoritarian regimes, and how these authoritarian regimes reconfigure global politics. So that therefore, at the geopolitical level, we have the United States, we have Russia, and then we have China, which is consolidating itself. So that what you then get in geopolitics are instead of a pole in which you got up in the Cold War, what you now have is a multipolar world. Although United States is still one of the major economies in the world, but certainly China is making its claim, and then Russia was making a political claim about itself as a major world power. One of the things I think that's important to understand is this: that if up to 1945, we would see a world in which there was the European colonial empires. That post 1945, which is important for us to understand, that although colonialism still existed in some places, it was not the order of the day, but that alongside what I've talked about in the liberal order was what some of us would call the growth of imperial empires. And so there's a distinction that one needs to make at this moment between imperial empires and colonial empires, although sometimes there's a slippage in the language in which we use to describe both of them. For the colonial empires, it is a form of domination in which there is settlement, in which there's economic extraction, in which there's direct rule of the colony, and in which there is deep cultural dispossession. In the imperial formations and configuration, there's economic extraction, there's not necessarily direct rule, and there's a way in which, in terms of rule, the countries that are dominating attempt to have influence over the politics rather than to have direct control. What I think is important in this new period of authoritarianism is the return of elements of colonialism. That is the return to elements not just of extraction, which is brute extraction, but is also a return to direct ownership where possible, or direct control in different ways where possible. I think in thinking about extraction, we need to understand the following. Today, I received a note that talked about what was happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is in the heart of Africa, Central Africa, but also which is a place in which it is said many of the world's rare minerals and resources exist. The Democratic Republic of Congo this morning, their time, presented to the United States government a proposal in which it was basically a short list of industries, mineral industries, that the United States could invest in. Those minerals include magnesium, copper, cobalt, gold, lithium, and which is very important. And that what the proposal was around a joint steering committee of American investors to take charge of these industries in the Congo. One of the things that your DP Stewart asked me to say was to say a little bit about Africa and this question of sovereignty as it is emerging. Because even though you have the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, doing this, there are countries in West African countries who are struggling to think about how to deal with this question of sovereignty. And here I'm talking about Burkina Faso, Mali, and Senegal. And that particular struggle centers around the currency in which was set up in the 1945 by the French, which was called the CFA. And many of you might not know, but up until today, because the debate and the struggle has not yet been successful, that up until today, the value of that currency of the CFA is actually guaranteed by France. But the condition for France to guarantee that value is that 50% of these countries' resources must remain in the French national treasury. So that here you have, if you're thinking about questions of sovereignty, then what you also have to think about is how the question of sovereignty is now being challenged and changed in the contemporary moment. First around questions of what I call brutish extractive processes, and then as well as processes where people are arguing for direct ownership now of the country as a way to influence its political processes. We see that very much in Venezuela. What happened a few weeks ago with the President Maduro, who was extracted and taken to United States. We see that in the Ukraine, in how Russia is attempting, how Russia is waging war in that particular country. What I think is important to understand is been summed up very much by a man called Stephen Miller in the Trump administration, where he makes it clear that the post-1945 world, that there was a fundamental mistake made by the Western powers, because as he argues, the world is governed by force, and that these have been the iron laws of the world from time immemorial. He then goes on to make the argument that one of the mistakes that the West did by doing things like aid and so on was to set up a process of what he called reverse colonization. So that therefore we are in a situation where all the rules of the international rules around from post-1945 are essentially being dismissed as having no particular relevance, but we have a political language or political rhetoric in which there is brute extraction is the name of the game. It is talked about. It is talked about openly, but alongside brute extraction and military operations is now the argument of who will own what. And that argument, therefore, is an argument in which undermines any notion of sovereignty. And obviously, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, we have the debates now around Greenland and around Canada. And those debates are not around negotiating tactics, I would argue, but they are debates about ownership of these particular territory countries. So we are in this new period of illiberalism. We're in this period of authoritarianism. And the question that we have to ask in the Caribbean is, what can sovereignty look like? Indeed, is it possible to have some kind of sovereignty? I would argue that the sovereignty that we have been accustomed to is a sovereignty that was constructed around primarily political independence. But I want, if I could, at this moment, give a particular anecdote, which shows you, I hope will show the audience how that kind of sovereignty can be, and it can be undermined. In about 1991, in another life, if you want to put it that way, I was asked to go to Washington, D.C. to begin a set of negotiations with the Inter-American Development Bank. The People's National Party government at that time had a shortfall in foreign exchange, did not want to go to the IMF, but thought that if one could get a certain relief from Inter-American Development Bank, then the conditions or conditionalities would not be as onerous. So my job was to go and talk to people in the Inter-American Development Bank about a possible loan for Jamaica to help our foreign exchange situation, but also to argue for reasonable conditions. At that breakfast meeting with the Inter-American Development Bank, they asked for a set of conditions, and some of which I said no, was not possible. And then they asked for, one of the conditions that they asked for was for us to end the Jamaica State Trading Corporation. When I responded to say that was really impossible, because one of the responsibilities of the State Trading Corporation was to scour the world for pharmaceuticals which could then be distributed to our public hospitals, and that's one of the ways in which ordinary poor people could had access to medication. And that secondly, the way in which it was set up meant that we had to go to Parliament, and that's to get permission to do that. And and I added in my response that this would then be an infringement of our sovereignty. The head of the Inter-American Development Bank looked me straight in the face and said, as a debtor country, you had no sovereignty. And I became very quiet, because it was very clear to me at that moment that we were not going to be able to, to get that loan. So the question, therefore, of sovereignty for us is not just a question of sovereignty that has to do with military interventions, but also has to do with the question of the space that we have in our own specific islands and our own specific countries to do the things that we need to do. And so I want to talk about that this business of what is it that stymies the sovereignty, and what is it that we might be able to do. I would want to argue that it is not just the present moment of authoritarianism that stymies our sovereignty. It does that, and we have to negotiate that. But also the question of our debt limits is part of what stymies our sovereignty. At this particular moment in Latin America, in 2004, Latin America and Caribbean combined, the debt portfolio was something like 5.8 trillion US dollars, about 117% of our GDP. That kind of debt portfolio makes it difficult, I think, because of how the structures of budgets and so on, to do things that are necessary to help and to help and create a ground for ordinary people to live a decent life. So that's an external impediment. Military possibilities of United States behaving in a certain way. All that is on the card. But there's also the question of the debt, which is on the cards. In a world of big power politics and right is might, the question, therefore, of what is it that we can do, and in a world in which we are deeply indebted, the entire region is deeply indebted, what is it that we can do? George Lamin, one of the most important writers of the Caribbean, in the post-colonial Caribbean in particular, had a phrase a couple of years before he passed about the sovereignty of the imagination. And that sovereignty of the imagination, he argued, was about reclaiming identity. I would argue it is more than about reclaiming identity. It's about defining ourselves, and defining ourselves with having a certain possibility about being able to do certain things based on our own set of understandings of ourselves and of the resources that we actually have. Today, in spite of, today I would argue that CARICOM is a loose form of regionalism, and that in a way, from the independence decolonization period, we have developed very much something that I like to call island nationalism. Island nationalism that says all of, we independently do whatever we want to do. We essentially, we come together now and again for trade and for certain things, but that essentially it is each of us row our own boat. That kind of way of thinking about ourselves in the Caribbean is a recipe for not going forward. That what we need instead of this island nationalism is that perhaps we need a broader Caribbean nationalism to achieve sovereignty. And that in part of that work to achieve sovereignty resides not just in this broad Caribbean nationalism, but also resides in one of the first tasks resides in trying to think about what some of us would call food sovereignty. A region that has a food import bill of $6 billion is not a region that I think we can think through and act on its own in ways that I think are foreground its own histories or its own interests. We can obviously not return to the past because we do not walk in the same river twice. Different currents are always running, and therefore we step in the river, in the same river, but not necessarily in the same currents. But there's something there, to think about achieving sovereignty in the region. We might have to therefore think of ourselves as a region in a much more profound way, not just as an Anglophone region, but also as a region with the other language groups. We have the same problems, three of them in particular, the same problems of climate, the same problems of debt, and the same problems of living in the American lake. We recognize that, and it was recognized from about 1986 by Barrow when he talked about a Caribbean civilization, of the necessity for deepening relationships within the Caribbean. We are a region that was born in the midst of European colonialism. We are a region that has produced remarkable culture, that has produced remarkable contribution to sports, remarkable contribution both in Spanish and English and French, to literature, to thought in general, and to art forms, and to the academy. How we do all these achievements, I think, constitute a Caribbean civilization. What we have not been able to do is to think about a civilization that can produce, make economic life, a decent economic life for all the inhabitants of the region. One of the possibilities, therefore, is to deepen our regionalism, and perhaps the transformation of CARICOM into an entity for regional sovereignty, not just a trading body, or a body, political body that comes together to talk about various things, but really an entity that has its focus as regional sovereignty. And to begin that regional sovereignty, talk about that regional sovereignty with regional sovereignty in food production for the entire region. I know that CARICOM has already set out a set of markers for that, but I would want to argue that that is one that task of regional food sovereignty is something that needs to be hastened and really should be on the table in a much more dynamic way. So what I'm arguing for is saying, yes, sovereignty is possible, but sovereignty is only possible in the region. That the island nationalism that has guided many of us from independence up until the present time is not sufficient as a guarantee for sovereignty. Although there are no guarantees for anything, perhaps in this chaotic world at this moment, that one of the things that we need to do is to think through very hard and work at setting up mechanisms, regional mechanisms that can produce some form, can produce sovereignty. I end with something. In about 1966 in Canada, Sailor James gave a speech, and in that about the West Indian and what the West Indian is. And he made a point about that we have achieved history and that we have made history and we have contributed to the making, indeed, he argued, of world history. That issue of the making of history is still on the table for us today. But it is about making history in which we can create societies that allows everybody to live a decent economic and social life. To begin that process of making everybody being able to live a decent and social and economic life is to think about how we can become a sovereign region. That is the question on the table in this world of illiberalism and authoritarianism. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Bogues. Fellow guests, Kiwanians and guests, we're gonna open the floor to questions. And I would probably just like to, all you have to do is use the hand in the Zoom feature, and then I'll be able to call on you. Let me see if I'm not seeing a hand up yet, but let me just check. Yes, Professor Bogues, it seems as if, okay, you're arguing that collectively, we might be able to achieve a greater degree of sovereignty than we can individually. But what would that have to mean? The formation of, maybe you could say, revisiting the concept of a federation? Is that what you are saying?
Yeah. Who is asking that question?
This is Stuart.
Oh, DP Stuart. Sorry. I didn't see you. I would say I put it on the table when people ask me. I'm an old federalist. In other words, I always thought that federation was important. I went to UWI. That to me was extraordinary, an extraordinary experience as a Jamaican. I learned about the rest of the, I learned about Trinidad, etc., Barbados, and so on. One of my first jobs at the University of the West Indies, given to me by Professor Neckleford, was to begin the UIDITE program, which meant I had to go to all these territories, including the Cayman Islands and so on, to set up these outreach centers, UIDITE centers, which is now called which is called the Open University. And I would just say to you, my experience of landing in every one of these countries and teaching in every one of these countries told me that this was a Caribbean country, told me that I was talking to the Caribbean, told me that this wasn't, that I, as a Jamaican, which is where I born and grow, that whether it was a Cayman, whether it was in Barbados, whether it was in Tobago, when it was in St. Lucia, when it was in Grenada, that actually I was speaking to a Caribbean, to Caribbean people. And that reinforced my own notion of this idea of federation. But I'm also a pragmatist. In other words, I don't think, okay, we should just, and that the federation failed and that you have, what I call this island nationalism. So what I'm arguing for is a deeper form of integration that will focus on specific things, so that one of the things would be, for example, what I'm saying, food security. This is, a region that spends $6 billion cannot, on food is on food imports is madness, is madness in many ways. We also should be thinking about, when I say CARICOM as a mechanism for regional sovereignty, how do we negotiate our debt, our external debt? How do we negotiate climate change in the world? I mean, to me, in other words, rather than just being reactive to these things, some of the things, and individually trying to march to our own drum, then we should begin to be thinking through. We should be thinking through how to organize and how to deepen regional cooperation through CARICOM, which is our region. I say CARICOM becomes the center of gravity for sovereignty that now takes on a necessary set of tasks that I think the region needs. That's what I'm arguing for. And not necessarily, I mean, that leads to federation 40, 500, 100 years on the line. That's okay with me. But for me, the thing is a deepening of the regional process around specific tasks that can allow us to develop some notion of sovereignty to some of the key questions of the day: climate and debt, and being in the American lake.
Okay, thank you. Since I don't see a hand up yet, so let me just follow up with this point. I think that I've sometimes, just in terms of my own thinking, felt that we would be at a greater risk. Although we have had the intervention in the 70s, we know that was no longer, we know that is now factual. It has been admitted of what happened in the 70s with the Michael Mann regime. But I somehow I'm kind of thinking that because we don't have the types of minerals that are either scarce or rare, that we're not as much of a target as for what is happening in some other countries. Like some of the African countries, for example, they really have what the more industrialized countries want. And they have done a lot and gone to extreme lengths to try and take control of it. And they are resisting now. But in our case, I'm not saying we don't have anything positive. We have a lot that we can be proud of, but we don't have the kind of things that are going to affect them industrially as much. Well, Ghana is part of our region, and now they have found, Bogues, much oil. But I was thinking that we're not as much of a target. Would you agree?
I don't agree that we are not necessarily a target.
As much of a target,
let me put it this way: that if the way the world system works, I think, and the geopolitics works, not just in this period of authoritarianism, but I think it will work. That's how it works, generally. Is that if you have a set of politics and a set of policies that does not necessarily support and does not necessarily deal with, does not necessarily, agree with, and you try to practice those politics, then you can essentially become a target. I mean, Grenada, in 1983, didn't have, nutmeg, right? There was no oil, there was nothing like that, right? But it became a target because of what it stood for, right? And it to me, it's, we become targets, not necessarily for the resources, although that's important. I mean, really important, particularly in this period of what I'm calling brutish extraction. But you don't necessarily have to have these things for people to think that
Okay.
for people to think that we need to intervene.
Okay, accepted. I see a hand up, David Abdullah. You could go ahead,
All
David.
right, Stuart, because of the time and we're almost out of time for the meeting, can I ask that we do the formalities and end, and then we take those questions and continue the discussion after we have terminated?
Okay. Well, may I suggest that we take the hands that are up? There are only 2 hands up.
No, there are 3 hands up. That's why I was suggesting that we do it after, so that everybody has an opportunity and we can properly ventilate what it is that they have to say.
Okay, but I think it would be more instructive if we just kept the answers short and just at least included this in this part. So let's just do the questions that are up. We keep it short, and then what we'll do after the meeting closes, Dr. Bogues has already agreed that he is prepared to stick around, and then we can have a more open period. So just let us take the 2. David, go ahead, please. But please keep it succinct.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Tony, thanks. I missed the first part, but excellent. On the issue of Caribbean, deeper Caribbean integration, given the fact that one of Trump's strategies is to divide CARICOM, and it is already very deeply divided, particularly Trinidad and Tobago's government taking the position it has as a lackey of Washington. Realistically, do you see it possible for the Caribbean leadership to engage in that deeper integration, which is necessary for the sovereignty that you say is possible?
All right, can we take the other question? Thank you, David.
The other hand that was up was a lady, I think. I don't see a hand up now. Let me just check. Yeah.
Gordon.
There's a lady. Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Gordon.
Yes, good evening. I was following the lecture, but I wasn't sure, I couldn't hear what the connection, was there a connection being made between the neoliberalism and the rise of authoritarian governments? And I wanted to understand that link a little bit better.
Let me just take that. Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Let me just make that very quickly. Yeah. What I'm arguing is that there is that there is a new conjuncture that is not neoliberalism. That there are elements of neoliberalism or globalization that have become part of that new conjuncture, particularly the speed in which technology has actually emerged, and and very importantly, the ways in which the tech billionaires are now, I would argue, are now constituting as themselves as an elite in the world, and not just an elite in the world that believe in the market, but an elite in the world that has a view about technology in something that they call transhumanism. All right, so, and I want to say that's a break from a certain kind of from neoliberalism. So if you think about it schematically, I'm thinking that there is 1945, post-1945 is quote unquote the liberal order with all the things that I talked about. 1980 is the neoliberal order, which is still within a liberal democratic container, even though there are some problems. And then post 2008, after the both really at the recession and the formation in the United States, right at the moment of Obama's victory of the Tea Party, right? It then begins to represent a different order that shifts towards authoritarianism and illiberalism. So so what I'm saying is that those are the ways in which it is. Those are the kind of those are the moments I want to argue, or the conjuncture, to use Stuart Hall's phrase of the different orders that have shaped the world.
Okay.
And then on response quickly to
Oh, the
David
other
to
one.
say,
Yes.
to David Abdullah, I understand that difficulty very well, and that's a difficulty that CARICOM has always had. The issue for me is what is the pressure that will come from below that will begin to force people to begin to think about CARICOM in a different way. It is interesting to me that it is Trinidad that is the kind of outlier at this particular moment. So what is it that the folks in Trinidad are going to be doing that make it quite clear to the Prime Minister of Trinidad that this is what she's doing is not on. So that to me is not a top-down bureaucratic approach, but is really more about trying to get mass activity to push CARICOM in a certain kind of way.
Okay, I think we can go to the vote of thanks now, and then we'll finish the meeting, and those who would like to stick around, we will pick up after the meeting closes. So, DP Rupert.
Thank you, DP Stu. Professor Barrymore Anthony Bogues, I worked somewhere where you had an association with that trip back in 1991. And it's good to hear you, sir. While you were speaking, you said you were in a hotel. I hope the temperature up in New England is not getting you down, because we're grateful that you could join up with warmer temperature in Jamaica tonight. And we are so grateful to you, Doc, that you took the time out. I know school just started back, and you're probably in the midst of doing a lot of lecturing, writing and stuff, but you have taken the time out to be with us. Enjoy College Hill, enjoy the east side of Providence. Remember Jamaica. Thank you. Thank you. You have taught us some. I wish we wish we had more time to be in a class with you, because you have given us history, you have given us economics, you have given us politics, so many things. Keep up the good work, Doc. Until we see you, and I suspect when you see me, you're gonna realize who it is.
Okay. Okay, sir.
We wish you and family well, sir.
Okay, sir.
I don't know you're gonna get our special certificate that we have for you.
I will be back in Jamaica in March, and I'm back in Jamaica at least 2-3 times a year.
Okay, if I come up to Providence, I come and look you up, sir.
Absolutely, you're most welcome, sir.
All right, Doc. We wish you well, not only from Jamaica, as you see, but from this evening we had people from throughout the Caribbean, and
yes, I saw that.
we just want to tell you thanks, Doc. Thank you so much. And you make our country proud, even though you are in the cold.
Yeah.
Okay, President, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, DP Rupert. Thank you again, Professor, for joining us and for sharing with us. At this time, I'm going to invite, if there are any clubs that's on or anyone that's on who would like to share any notices or announcements with us, I'll give you the opportunity to do so now. Going once, going twice, going 3 times, gone. until next week. For our thought for this week, consistent small efforts accumulate into big achievements over time. So one more time, consistent small efforts accumulate into big achievements over time. So for this week, we're going to do a blanket fine of $200 for all members of the Kiwanis Club of Kingston. And with that said, I am now going to invite you all. Having said thanks for being with us this week, I'm going to invite you to raise your glasses with us, whether figurative, literal, however it is, in a toast to Kiwani International and to Jamaica, land we love. This meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Kingston is now terminated. But do stick around as we continue the discussion with Professor Bogues. Kingston. And with that said, I am now going to invite you all. Having said thanks for being with us this week, I'm going to invite you to raise your glasses with us, whether figurative, literal, however it is, in a toast to Kiwani International and to Jamaica, land we love. This meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Kingston is now terminated.
Yeah, I was having I don't know what was happening a while ago. I was trying to share, but eventually it did come up, the certificate. I don't, if there was anybody, if you can still put up your hand, if you, it's kind of open now. It's kind of open. You don't really, if you just speak and you want to say something, it's okay to do that. But there's another dimension that I'm looking at when I look at the whole geopolitical situation that I think could give us well, and this has to do with the dollar. The petrodollar is now no longer as sound a concept as it has always been, and that is one of the things that the US has used in order to be able to just print money and maintain their bases overseas. I understand they have between 750 and 800 bases overseas. And I'm wondering, that is part of where their power comes from, because of their ability to do that. Now, if that situation was to become less strong, it would weaken their ability to do what they want to do, you know, in the world at large. But I don't know how imminent that weakening would be, because things take a long time to manifest themselves. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the United, as an imperial power, the US is, in the next 15 to 20 years, will not be the only, will not be the major economy in the world. It is today, right? If feeling is that in about 20, 30 years, that will
could you speak into the mic a little bit more?
Sorry,
sorry. Right. Yeah.
I was saying that in about, United States is the major economy in the world. Like, you know, all the statistics show us that. But you're looking in another 20, 30 years, I would argue that's not going to be so. Okay. Part of the difficulty, I think, inside the United States domestic politics is that there is the recognition that a power that was built on mass industrialization and what some of us would call a kind of massification, from the motor cars to the communications, etc., that project is now over. Right, with what you would call the technological revolution, and that there was no thinking about what it is that needed to happen when this was happening, right? When that process of deindustrialization and demanufacturing was taking place in the United States. So what you have now in the regimes, the authoritarian regimes, is an idea of making America great again through manufacturing, through which, and that's not going to happen, quite frankly.
No.
But it's also at the level of the political, what you have is what I call a certain kind of nostalgia, right? And that nostalgia feeds into some of the authoritarian things because the people think that we can go back to the 1960s. And those of you, I mean, there's a very important white artist in America called Rockwell, and his paint Rockwell. The Rockwell paintings actually portray a certain kind of America with the American dream. That's not going to happen again. If you are making the point, sir, that there's going to be a decline in the United States, then I would argue that decline has begun, but the declines can take years.
Yes.
Years. The decline of the Roman Empire took hundreds of years. The decline of the European colonial empires did not happen overnight. But what is interesting is the reconfiguration of the world. And and it is in that reconfiguration that we need to look at the spaces that we can think about sovereignty. But really very important, what is also, I think, is critical, is that we have to look around issues of technology. What it is, because what it is that AI and other technological innovations will do to create a different kind of world. And very importantly for me, what is it the elites who are involved in this process, what it is that they want, and how therefore do we need to then counter that? I would want to argue, and this is something I've been arguing for the last 6 months or so in the talks I've been giving, that the ways in which the societies are going in the authoritarian domain is that the key thing is obedience. You have to obey, right? If on the neoliberalism, it is about, okay, turning all of us into a certain kind of consumer. So we love Nike and so on and so forth, and we think about nothing else but consumerism. In this particular dispensation, in this conjuncture, is about obedience. You have to obey, which is why the people. This is why you get a certain politics that looks like a politics of revenge in many places, but it's not a politics of revenge. It's a politics to make sure that there is obedience, because people will then begin to have fear. So that you want to, the new thing, the new conjuncture is unfolding before us. We have to think through technology. We have to think through the new geopolitics. We have to think through the different ways in which what I call rule over us as human beings is constructed, and what is it that people are demanding. Okay, there's a long answer, but that's where I see it. The petrodollars are no longer are important. I mean, it is Bitcoin and so on. So the petrodollars don't have the importance that they had 1970s, 1980s, or even 1990s. Is different currencies are now are playing around.
Okay. I'd like to invite others to, be a part of the discussion. This was not intended to be a one-on-one with the professor for me. So either just jump in or put up your hand if you prefer.
Okay, can I just make a contribution?
Sure, go ahead, Rob.
Let me thank Tony for the presentation. However, the question of the political discussion at the ground level in the Caribbean countries we have not been having any kind of political education, the true sense of political education. I regard this presentation as political education. In other words, it's not partisan education that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the shifts, radical shifts that are taking place in what you correctly call the American lake. And I think people are caught between confusion and fear. And we have been accustomed to, in the neoliberal era to the absence of political thinking. And this new period now requires a understanding of where the world, everything is changing, as you point out. The question, therefore, is for CARICOM to assume this agenda, we cannot depend only on our leaders. We as citizens have to empower ourselves, and the tools for empowerment exist. And this is something where I think community groups, and I'm glad the Kiwanis is having this discussion, because the churches should be having this discussion, because the evangelical movement are part of Trump's entourage. And the evangelical movement is also strong in the Caribbean. So that our role as citizens, that role becomes important. So, Stuart, I want you to also take into account that sometimes people may not want to talk, but they put comments in the chat,
Oh,
which
yes.
I think are important for us to also respond to. Thank you.
Thanks for reminding me. I did look at a few, but they were mainly about the sound, which wasn't so great in the beginning. But I'll see if there are any others that I could raise. Thank you for that reminder.
Now I have a question for the doc.
I see Dr. Thiem has her hand up as well.
So,
sorry. Who is this?
My name is Bill.
Okay, Bill, go ahead.
So, Doc, I'm thinking when I look at the national security strategy that they've written, that clearly they want to be dominant in this sphere. They want to create a hegemon in this our sphere. Now, if we look at what happened, for example, with Venezuela, or what's happening in Cuba, and if we're going to keep it real, we realize it would seem to me that if we don't comply or conform, then the outlook will not be good for us. So as much as we want to say, boy, we would love to have sovereignty, we want to be independent, we want to determine our own future. Unless we have a multipolar world where we can align elsewhere, which at this moment, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, I think we just have to conform.
Yeah, I mean, Bill, there is that view. I know. I was in a meeting this morning. I'm in Jamaica. I mean, it was Zoom, so it was a Jamaican meeting. And the idea, the mood of the meeting, not the idea, but the mood of the meeting was that let's just keep our head down and hope that this man will go away and hope that this thing will go away. I am not of that view. I am not of the view that you must lick out, to use a Jamaican phrase, and then draw attention to yourself and make another man lick your head. That's not what, And if you know, that's not what I am. I'm saying I'm also pragmatic, right? But I'm of the view that every time you accede to a bully, every time you accede to somebody hitting you in your head, that there will become a time when, you know, them used to, you know, something the Lord used to say, if you lick me on one cheek, you can lick me on the other one. But you have to, you know, there's a thing of, you only have two cheek. Right? And so for me, it is about following a set of politics and a set of political practices, more importantly, in which you are going to have to resist in some way this business of the imperial bullying. You know, it is because you know that if you keep your head down, then there's also, quite frankly, Bill, no guarantee that you will not be hit.
Yes,
There's
definitely.
no guarantee that you will not be hit, right?
I have to agree with you on that.
This regime, an authoritarian regime, that not just here but in Hungary, in Russia, right? You don't have to be mechanized. They have to perceive that you are doing something, that you are not in agreement with them. Even a perception, even if you are, and they will come for you. And so that it is, you know, you ask people who live under authoritarian regimes what it is. If you keep quiet, what happened to you? If in fact keeping quiet is that they don't come for you. And so that, you know, I am not for mechanized, you know, I'm not for mechanized all the time, but I'm for standing up for certain principles which I think are important for us. Because and let me end by making this statement. I think it is not just the Caribbean, frankly. I think that we are in a very dangerous moment in the world. Right? I do a lot of traveling, a lot of speaking, and everywhere I go, I sense a certain level of crisis and a certain level of deep concern about what we are doing in the world or where we are in the world. And for me, it is about speaking about those things and speaking up about those things. And that if you don't speak, it is, in my view, a guarantee that the world will go in one direction. If you speak, then there is a possibility that we will not go into that direction. And therefore, for me, being able to speak becomes important.
Okay, I see some hands up now. Let me see if I can make out the first one. Thame. I can make out the last name. It's Thame. Not sure.
Dr. Thame. Dr. Thame.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Evening, everyone. So just to add to Bill's concern, the point that the international order has always been a difficult one for Caribbean countries, and that did not historically stop them from finding solidarities that could navigate power in the world. But I have a question for Tony in relation to this idea of food sovereignty as one way of thinking about possibilities for sovereignty and regional food sovereignty in particular. I think it assumes that the imperatives of our governments align with the interests of everyday people in the Caribbean. And we're talking about Trumpism and authoritarianism in the United States, but I am interested in the authoritarian turn, which is also occurring in the Caribbean and Latin America. And I wonder how you see that in terms of the prospects for developing alternative politics, a sovereignty that would locate people at the center. earlier we were in a conversation about the ZOSO bill, which is to be being debated in Trinidad. And to me, it indicates a sort of mimicking of authoritarian behavior that is happening in Jamaica, elsewhere in the Caribbean. Certainly, of course, aligned with right-wing politics. So I just wanted to hear from you more as to what you see the politics, how you see the politics of the region unfolding currently in terms of those prospects for developing some notion of sovereignty that has to do with people's actual needs.
Thank you, Dr. Thiam. Professor Lewis had on his Facebook page a couple weeks ago, I think, a phrase that says, and it was in Yale, if my memory serves me right, a dread time for Caribbean sovereignty. I think that's what it said. And I begin from that. I begin from that yet this is not a good moment at all. But I also want to take something from what Professor Lewis said, which I think is critical. That is that we have not had in the Caribbean, because of the neoliberal period that we went into in the 1980s, in my view, we have not had major public political education about the region, about politics, about economics, and so on, at all. That we have kind of forfeited for whatever reason, like, that governments and political parties and so on have forfeited that position. And I would want to argue, Comrade Thiam, Dr. Thiam, that one of the key things that one needs to think through is a set of programs around public political education that includes constitutional reform, that includes these questions some of the questions that I have addressed, that as a way to begin to give people information, and not to do it in the conventional way. That the technology is there for TikTok, Instagram, not Facebook. Facebook is my generation. To begin to do the necessary political educational work, to present an alternative view of politics and possibilities in this region. That has not been done, and that's where that is where I would want to begin. It's not an easy process. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and in my view, one has to start somewhere. Which is why, quite frankly, I said I would do this, even though it's the beginning of the semester and I have 1,000,001 other things on the table.
There were two other hands up, but I don't see them anymore. But you're welcome to speak if you still want to. But I couldn't recall the names that were there. But there was something Bill had said. He said that he didn't think that the multipolar is as if he had given up on that happening. I was wondering why you felt so pessimistic, because if you're not recognizing what is happening with China. So I just wondered why you felt so pessimistic. I mean, China is still a smaller economy, but because of the connections that they are building, I mean, China does provide an alternative for, in fact, a lot of the African countries and even some of in the Caribbean.
No, if I could respond.
Sure you can.
So while China is definitely on the rise, but John Mearsheimer wrote a book. It's called The Tragedy of Great Powers, and America is hell bent on containing China. I and has always been hell-bent on containing Russia. And if this war continues, that multipolarity with Russia as being one of the poles may not happen. So then we may end up with a bipolar world. But if what Trump with the Donroe Doctrine is trying to project is that China, if you stay in your sphere, we won't bother you as long as you don't bother us. I think China might just settle for that, which would then give us no options.
Okay. Okay, I understand your point. It's debatable.
Hi, I had a question.
I'd like to hear what Doc thinks about it. Yeah?
No, I mean, at the heart, the assumption of your question, your concern, and a legitimate concern, is that small countries can't go it on their own. They need to be tied to some big power. Right? That I think is that that's at the heart, the heart of the assumption frame that you are asking, right? Jamaica can't go on its own, 3 million people. Trinidad can't go on its own. St. Lucia, St. Kitts, etc. Even Cuba, and so on. In other words, the point I am trying to make is that if you're thinking about economies of scale and if you're thinking about numbers, then you individually, we might, yes, you will need to be dependent on a big power. Collectively, I don't know if the region needs to depend on a big power. Right? Collectively, not individually, and that's what I'm trying. That's what I'm arguing. Now that that is a hard thing to get to, because as everybody on this call has spoken about or has addressed this question of the fracturing in CARICOM and the ways in which each of these what I call island nationalism it operates and takes over our consciousness about possibilities. And part of the island nationalism is a kind of jealousy between people and so on. And we only, the only time we didn't have it was when we had West Indies cricket. And even then it appeared in West Indies cricket as who could be chosen and who could not be chosen and so on. And that's when we were dominant in the game. So that there is there is that problem. But I really come back to something that, that Professor Rupert Lewis talked about, and that is a certain kind of political education. But it's also a certain kind of gaze that we probably need to have, that is not just focused on the elite and on the middle, but focus on ordinary people. I cannot forget standing up in the Barbados airport, trying to catch a flight to go somewhere, and to see a group about 4 years ago, to see a group of women from Jamaica standing up in the airport, trying to catch a flight to Guyana. And the conversation between them was that how Guyana was going to be the next big thing in the Caribbean. And that these were just ordinary Jamaican women who were past Iglas, some of them in Panama City and so on years ago. And what they were going to Guyana to do, there's about 5, 6 of them, was to begin to suss out what might be possible in Guyana as Guyana, because they think in 4 or 5 years, Guyana was going to be the big thing, the thing that busts in the Caribbean, to use their language. And I just thought to myself, I don't see any state official from any country in the Caribbean thinking in that kind of terms, that but here are a group of women, or just market women, higglers as we call them, who were thinking about economic life. Right? So for me, it is not, these things are not impossible, right? There is possibility if one begins to educate and one begins to trust people's instinct and begin to have a way forward, that's about a region.
I think Kadina tried to ask a question. I did see her name before it disappeared. I'd like to invite her to say what she wanted to say. I saw the name Kadina. I can't remember the rest of it. Okay, maybe she isn't on anymore.
This ignorance, Dennis, I see that thing.
Just one thing.
I see Dennis Smith has something in the chat that says,
okay,
ignorance check. I don't know what he was referring
to.
That
you mean his hand is up?
No. Okay, sorry. And my apologies for being low, right? I don't have my what you call it with me in this room.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yes, thank you.
How are you doing, sir?
Good to hear you. Good to see you, sir. Thank you. I'm well. I saw someone mention in the chat earlier about the possibility of the Caribbean looking to Africa in terms of, a longer term strengthening our own sovereignty. And I think it ties back into some of what has been said before. And so the question is, how do you see a relationship with the wider Caribbean and Africa playing out in this context? Because I am of the belief that for states like ourselves, we need to attach our boats to a larger vessel. And to me, that's the direction that we need to move, even as we deal with the issues of political education and those other things in the immediate.
I think it's a really important question, and that we have to, the African continent, it's 54 countries, many languages, right? It's not just it's not one country. The question that the issue that arises is what are the set of relationships that we need to have with Africa, and hard economic relationships that we need to have with Africa, and how is it that we can build these. And I agree with you in principle of that there needs to be a much deeper connection, both economic and social, and cultural, with continental Africa, and not just with West Africa, right? Because we have an idea is that Nigeria and Ghana, or West Africa that speak that speaks English. So it's Nigeria, it's Ghana, and so on. But so the English-speaking African countries on the West Coast. But to think about the relationship with places like Angola, to think about the relationship with places in the southern part of Africa, particularly South Africa. But I would also want to say to people that these are relations that are built over time and require a lot of hard work and a lot of thinking and a lot of support, state support, from both sides, in my view, for them to have any set of meeting, any set of significances. And so that's how that's how I see it. But at the same time, it is, we have to, the world is not a dream world. So and I'm saying this, I was talking to a Ghanaian, very important journalist, and we were talking precisely about what you just said. I'm talking to her about 4 days ago, and then she pointed out to me a situation in which a Nigerian airline making a link to the Caribbean, opening up this trips or airline connections. Go and people are on the flight, on a particular flight, buy tickets to come to Kingston, and the flight goes to Barbados. I have no difficulty with the flight going to Barbados, obviously, given what I believe. But what I was thinking is how each of us know 50% of Africa. So that even the pilots, in their head,
I'm kind of moderating this section.
Have 50% of each of us know 50% of let me put it another way. Africans know 50% of the Caribbean. We know 50% of Africa. And so that the pilots themselves could then decide to land in Barbados and not Kingston. Okay, and think they were in the Caribbean, and they're in the Caribbean, obviously. But people on the plane, many people on the plane, had booked tickets for Jamaica, so it caused all sorts of confusion. And so I was not accusing anybody of anything, but just saying to myself, how an economic venture of links, which is supposed to be tourism, to draw people, to take people from Nigeria to Kingston, that or a lack of knowledge of each other creates a set of difficulties. And so I want to come back to, to us understanding each, knowing if you're going to do Africa, then which part of Africa, where in Africa, what are the governments you're talking to, what languages you're speaking into, and so on. That these are real questions that you have to answer.
But I think the point, maybe beginning to build something. I think from a business point of view, I think a lot of people are just not looking in that direction. I mean, whereas even if it's not going to happen overnight, it does take time to build relationships. But I would love to see people looking in that direction.
Perspective, I agree. Perspective, yeah. I agree. But I also want to say it is not easy.
Yes.
Not, that's the point I'm making. There's not a quick. There's no quick fix there.
Mm-hmm. But when you think about it, there is a lot. I don't know how it would be in business, but from a cultural point of view, there's a lot of communication and exchange going on right now. It has been for years. So it's not as if we're dealing with people who are strange to us or that they are not familiar with us. So I think we could even use some of the cultural links to help to build this kind of a business relationship.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. We usually just after we wrap on the discussion. Look, I think we're kind of winding down. It has been our tradition that we play music for those who choose to stick around. But I think we're getting to a point where we're kind of winding down. If there's nobody else who has something burning that they want to raise, then we can kind of phase out this section.
Well, I just wanted to make one comment. Doc, I really never understood until tonight the difference between imperialism and colonialism. I learned so much tonight. And thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Yes. Another distinction I saw recently. I was watching this YouTube, and it was an interview with Ibrahim Traore. I think it must have been fairly recent. and he made, I guess, talking about African countries uniting, which I've always thought, if it is even gonna happen, it's gonna have to start with just a few. I mean, even America didn't start with 50 countries. It started with, I think it was 13. So, and then he made a distinction. Somebody was asking him about the how the AES functions, and he made a point that it was not a federation, it was a confederation. And then I had to go back and look and check it, check on Google, because I wasn't quite aware of what that meant, and then I realized what he meant. You know, that in a confederation, everybody retains their own autonomy, whereas in a federation, you would have basically a single government. And it was I just found it interesting because it's something I never thought about. I never realized it was a different word. You know, I just never thought about it before, and I was just glad to have heard that was, you know. So you can have these different. I guess the union, the European Union is a kind of a confederation, I guess, in a sense. I just found that interesting. Well, thank you, Prof. I appreciate your willingness to.
I am asking question.
Deborah, you want to say something, Deborah?
Yes.
Go ahead.
In the end of the day, we don't think that deepening of the federation will happen, as David said, having regard to Trinidad and Tobago's kind of position at this time. What can small...
You're breaking up. Keep going, but
okay,
you're breaking up. You're breaking up.
Any
try,
better?
Try again.
Okay, I'm saying that I don't think that deepening of the federation would happen, having regard to Trinidad and Tobago's position. So my question bugging around in my mind for the night is, what can small islands do, practical things on their own, them or their citizenry, to stay alive, to stay afloat, to do something new or protective? I mean, we travel to the US, we now subject to ICE. What can we really do to shield ourselves from what is coming at us? Is there anything? We just lie down and say, well, we little and we ain't Talawa. What steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hard things that we can really cut into?
I don't think we can do anything about ICE and what ICE is doing. But let me just mention something before I go to the professor. There are a group of islands. I can't name them all individually. That is already a group. In other words, they have a common central bank. Those of you who are more familiar with the runnings might be able. I think about 5 or 6 countries. So there are individual groupings within the whole CARICOM that are doing things together. Somebody who knows more than me can tell me which countries those are. It does help when you have a common, and they have had a currency, which, because no one has the power to individually change rates or so on. You know, in other words, they have had a currency which has remained a lot more stable than even the Jamaican dollar, which has not been stable. If you can remember the days when it was, well, we all know what happened to the Jamaican dollar. So I don't know if anybody knows which are the groups. I just know
Organization of Eastern Caribbean States.
Right. Right, that's correct. Yeah. So there are things that within the CARICOM region that groups of islands can do together, you know. But I don't know if Professor wants to address that.
Because what you said is right on what Professor Lewis gave the name, and I think it's You talk about the currency, it's the the governor of that central bank, former economist, taught me economics at UA, Dwight Venner, who went back home to to set up the central work in the central bank. And that the currency has been remained very stable, but I think also very importantly that they have deepened a set of relationships between them as individual islands, and therefore I think in my view, when I look at them, they remain a model for our next step, the next step of CARICOM. That's what I've always felt about them.
Yeah. I've always been impressed when I heard about them being able to maintain a fairly stable currency. But that was as much as I knew. Okay. Well, once again, thanks, Prof. It has been our pleasure to host you, and we really appreciate what you were able to share with us this evening. So I'm gonna cut the stream. We do have a stream, but I don't promote the stream because we prefer to see who is on. So we just promote the Zoom link, and then afterwards we post it on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so and I'd like to encourage those who are interested to subscribe. It's just called the KCOK YouTube channel. It's very easy to find, and most of our meetings basically go on the channel. So that's how I'm now gonna end the stream, and then I'm gonna cut the recording because I did a double take this evening by also recording it just in case something went wrong with the stream. So let me just stop that. Thanks again, everybody.
Well, thank you all very, very much for inviting me, and thanks very much for listening. My apologies about the low sound, but I hope that people got most of what I was saying. So thanks again, and good night to everybody. Yeah?
Okay. Good night, bro. Let's do this.